I'm Peter B. Collins, and I'm delighted to be here with you tonight. And I also want to greet our viewers who are watching on cable access across Humboldt County. I'm glad to have the opportunity to introduce you to Susan Adams, who is, I think, an excellent candidate for the open seat in Congress here in District 2. And I live in Marin County, and I am really delighted that we are now in the same congressional district with the great people here on the North Coast. And just a quick note, Susan and I were some of 150 people who went to testify at one of the hearings of the Citizens Redistricting Committee. And she went to great lengths to say, I want a district that runs from the Golden Gate Bridge to the Oregon border, because the common interests of those of us who live on the coast are different. And in Marin County, we didn't want to be sharing a member of Congress with San Francisco because we thought that we wouldn't get the attention that we deserve. And so this is a sprawling district. It's somewhere around 500 miles from the Golden Gate Bridge to the end of Del Norte County. And this is an open seat with a new primary system, which means that voters have a complete choice here. And tonight, I want you to meet Susan Adams. I want you to get acquainted with her positions on the issues, and I ask you to give her your full consideration before you decide who you want to represent you in Congress for the next 2 years or more. Susan, welcome to Arcata.
Thank you.
And first, let's talk about you. Susan has a background as a nurse. She is a single mother who put herself through graduate school while raising 2 children. And she entered public service later in life. She is now in her 3rd term on the Board of Supervisors in Marin County. And I met her when she ran the first time. And she was the underdog, not once, but twice, in the primary and in the general. And she is accustomed to being in races where other people raise more money, other people have the endorsements of the political establishment, and she has defied those odds and won election 3 times in Marin County. Susan, tell our audience here and our viewers, what is propelling you to want to take the experience that you've gained at the local level and take it to Washington?
I think Washington is broken right now, and I think we don't have enough woman voice there. We have 16% of our elected representatives are women, and I think women speak about families, about mothers and children's issues, and as a nurse and as a women's health nurse practitioner who's been fighting for reproductive choice, I don't know how many of you have been watching the battles that have been going on right now about taking away, the possibility for contraceptive coverage for women from their insurances. And I say, well, are we taking away the Viagra coverage too? So we have some really difficult challenges. And I think as a nurse and as an educator, I was also a professor of nursing. I taught health policy. I've been a single payer healthcare advocate longer than any other politician did, because I did it within the context of working through my nursing organizations, that I bring a perspective that is unique. I also have very deep family roots here. I rooted for my nephews when they played football. I won't tell you which high school because it was a different high school than where we're located now. But spent a lot of time with my brother fishing on the Van Duzen and out at the South Spit. And no matter what happens in this election, I'm still a frequent flyer in this community, and the community knows me. I've been, what I've learned in 10 years on the Board of Supervisors is how you get that extra vote so that you can get your policies passed, how to be brave and courageous when maybe you're the only no vote, but you have to speak truth, and how to get the job done. I'm not afraid to fight the tough battles, and I've gone up against PG&E when we fought to become Marin Clean Energy Authority. I just had a meeting with Mayor Winkler and a group tonight to talk about the possibility of Arcata and Marin connecting in some way, so that my vision for the future is that the 2nd Congressional District can show the rest of the country how we can be off the fossil fuel grid in the next 10 years. Mm-hmm. We don't have to depend on foreign oil. And it happens at the local level. So one of the things that having the local government lens has shown me is when state and federal lawmakers make laws that obstruct us from being able to do the really good work that we're trying to accomplish at the local level, or not being able to get us the resources that we need to get us the jump start to be able to deliver those things. And your congressional leader is not going to be should not be telling you what's best for you. I think the community needs to say, this is where we see our job growth, this is where we see our opportunities, and we need you to help us to get the resources, or to craft the legislation, or to talk to the regulators about how we are able to accomplish those things. So I'm very excited about this district. I think that between my local lens, with my background in healthcare, with the ability to bring people together to solve difficult problems, and I have a number of examples of that, and not being able to be bullied by large corporate interests. And I've won some pretty tough battles at the local level. So I'm ready to take that fight to Washington. I think I'm a great selection for this district, and if I have the honor of serving, I will work hard, I will do my homework, and I've made the commitment that when I'm back and forth between Washington, half of the time I will spend in the southern part of the district, and the other half I will be up here with this part of the district, because the issues are important and sometimes different, and so you need to have a representative that will be present for you.
And Susan, Humboldt County and the North Coast have important issues that they have been dealing with here for a long time. The nation has been in a deep recession, and most Americans know the hard times of foreclosures, of job loss, of people who were led into bankruptcy by healthcare costs that they could not shoulder. But it's particularly more difficult here on the North Coast, where some of the primary sources of jobs in the past are no longer hiring people. And the prediction is that we're going to have a jobless recovery. And so as I look around, just the cost of gasoline here is easily 40 cents higher than it is in the San Francisco Bay Area, against lower average incomes. So please talk a little bit about the challenges here in this area, and how you will work to make sure that we return to full employment, not just cutting the unemployment rate to the point where the bankers are happy.
Right. Well, that's a lot. We, definitely, if we look at where we've been investing our resources over the last 10 years in this military effort overseas, up to $10 billion a month going into a war effort for probably more oil interests than really terrorist interests. If we take those dollars back and reinvest them into our community, and I think the President's plan for jobs is actually, there's a lot of good things in that plan. Reinvest in our infrastructure. How many of you are driving over the potholes on some of our rural roads that haven't been addressed in a long time? Those are good jobs. People that are paving those roads come usually from contractors in our communities who are doing that work. Some of our schools are in difficult situations with leaking roofs. We have, if we look at the energy opportunities, let's take the subsidies away from the oil industry and direct them instead into clean and renewable energy, and then have the opportunity to have some infusion of dollars here. Also, we're going to be seeing about 33 million more Americans entering our healthcare system. And we don't have the capacity right now to take care of all of those people. And Humboldt State just closed their nursing department not that long ago. And so at a time when we need more healthcare providers, what are we doing to help with the training? And healthcare, delivering healthcare is a good paying job. And so, if we think about the things that we have in our community, the resources that we have, Arcata's actually done a really incredible job In one example with the FoodWorks program, incubating small food businesses and allowing them to expand and grow jobs. Short sea shipping is another area where we can be looking at how do we use shallow shipping opportunities and barging to have like a transport system up and down our coast, a coastal highway, to move goods so that perhaps the oil or the water or the goods that are coming in, the gasoline, doesn't have to be as expensive because there's a lower cost way to do it without having to expand freeways or perhaps even taking a train through a very difficult rail system. And there's a lot of complicated issues, but I have a record for being able to get people into the room and doing my homework and solving the problem. And I'll just give you one example. We had a mining operation in my community that was violating a lot of different rules and regulations, and the community wanted them shut down. They were grandfathered in. And we went through the court system. I did a very difficult mediation with this group, and to the point where, you know, I had to go and take a course through the UC Davis Extension to learn about mining, and I went to a couple of national conventions to learn about best practices, so that when I was sitting down with the mine and they were saying they couldn't do something, I could pull up an example from Kentucky and say, well, they're doing it here, and Kentucky's a poor state, and if they can do it in Kentucky, you can do it here. They put a lot of money behind my opponent in my last race because they didn't like the direction I was going. I won the race. I got them back to the table again, and we hammered out a deal that has 173 conditions of operation that protects and enhances wetlands and restores natural habitat and closes operations. And both the community and the quarry came to our board, and we supported the permit unanimously. And I wasn't surprised when the community said they were going to support me, but I was very surprised when the quarry said they were going to support me because of that 8-year battle. And I said, why? And they said, well, we beat the you-know-what out of you during your last race. You didn't hold a grudge. You got us back to the table. You made us solve the problems. And our relationship with the community has never been better. The community said the same thing. And they said, and our bottom line has been fine. And so we think that's the kind of leadership we need in Washington. We need people that are going to talk to each other and solve problems and get away from this partisan entrenchment and chest thumping that's happening there, that's not solving the really important and critical problems in our communities, in our country. And so, you know, I'm really looking forward to rolling up my sleeves, and I think that there are lots of opportunities for job development and even looking at how we manage our resources in a way that can bring some equity back into the communities, again, that are resource dependent in their economies.
Susan Adams, tonight here in Arcata, you're unveiling the 10-point Adams agenda. And I want to touch on as many of these points as we can because I think they help define you as a candidate and help the people here and those watching understand how you would represent them in Washington. It's very clear from the efforts of the Occupy movement that most Americans are now aware of the huge disparities that have been driven by fiscal policies going back to the Reagan era. But truly, they went on steroids during the Bush administration. And while we've identified the problem that we've transferred too much wealth to the people who already have wealth, that our tax policies favor them over working families, and that there is this generalized awareness that things are way out of whack. So tell us what you would do to restore the middle class, restore the safety nets that have been shredded by budget cuts at the local, state, and federal level, and how we get back on track to have an America that reflects the interests of all of us.
Right, well, the disparity between the rich and the poor certainly has grown tremendously. And even if we went back to the Reagan cuts, which the Republicans thought were great back in those days, we would be taking a good first step. You know, we have Warren Buffett who said, I am not paying enough money. My secretary is paying a lot higher percentage of her income into taxes than I'm paying. And I think I need to pay more taxes. And it's not just Warren Buffett, it's others that are now joining him that are saying that refrain. And yet Congress is not listening to Warren Buffett. And I'm saying, send me to Congress, I want to help Warren. I want to help him pay more taxes.
I just want to point out that in her first response about this, Susan referred to the poor. And even many Democrats these days don't address the needs and the challenges faced by working poor and other poor families in this country. They skip right up to the middle class. And I think it's really important because far too many candidates are focused on what they see as the middle of the pack, where they can raise money, where they can get votes. And far too many of our political leaders have written off the people in our communities who need support and need government programs and the safety net more than others. Last week, the New York Times on Sunday ran a lengthy article about the county in Minnesota called Chisago. It's like Chicago with an S. And they point out that the people there are against government programs. That's what they say. It's a red county. They vote for Republicans all the time. And yet they are relying more on government programs per capita than the entire state of California. And that disconnect, which Thomas Frank wrote about in his book, What's the Matter with Kansas, is something that has really come into sharp definition with the struggles and the courage of Occupy protesters and others who are standing up for the rights of average Americans. And I think that's a real issue that distinguishes Susan from many of the other good Democrats and good people who are in this race for this congressional seat. Susan, next I'd like to ask you to talk.
May I just comment quickly
Please.
on that? Because in my clinical practice, my specialty was with drug-addicted pregnant women. And most of them were women who were living in poverty, who were involved with the criminal justice system. And I bring that lens with me into my policy making. And as a result of my professional experience, I developed a criminal justice and behavioral health task force, and we looked at issues around therapeutic justice and behavioral health and the intersect between people who have mental illness or substance abuse problems and the expense of warehousing them in jails. And we did a program over the last 7 years that I'm really proud of, that we've taken 200 severely mentally ill people, put them into treatment, case management, wraparound services, and job training, and they are now, the majority of them, employed taxpayers. We've reduced the recidivism by 85%, psych emergency visits by 55%. We have empty jail beds in our county, maybe not for long now that the state wants to, put people back in our community. But we've demonstrated that when you invest into treatment and therapy, people can actually become community assets instead of community liabilities. And I think it's really important that we work together as a community to build all of us up, because you're only as strong as your weakest link. And so I'm really proud of that program. And we also have a program for our homeless mentally ill. We were able to access VASH vouchers, which are Section 8 vouchers for mentally ill veterans. And with the war ending, hopefully soon, and 2 million veterans maybe coming back home to us in varying states of health, maybe not all will have body parts obviously missing, but there's going to be a lot of hearts and spirits that are going to not be able to leave that war back home. And we will see another wave of mentally ill offenders from this wave of veterans that are going to be coming home to us. And we need to be able to help our men and women who have served to reintegrate back into civilian life in a healthy way. And there's a great program in Eureka that has services for our veterans and that help them with their challenges. And so you're already doing it up here in Humboldt too, but those are the kinds of programs that are going to need the infusion of some federal dollars to keep them going and to keep our community moving in the right direction.
Susan, you mentioned earlier that you've been a single-payer advocate before the issues were really framed, going back to the Clinton attempt at healthcare reform in the early 1990s. And President Obama's healthcare reform did achieve some important gains, but many of us believe that single-payer is the way to take the profit out of the delivery of health insurance, so that our dollars go to healthcare and not to the salary of a guy who's taking out $20 or $50 million a year from a health insurance company. So talk about the path forward to a single-payer program and your preference for expanding Medicare to cover all Americans.
Right, and when people say we don't want a single-payer system of healthcare, I say, well, we already have one. It's called Medicare. Only in our Medicare system, we have the oldest and sickest and most disabled people in the pool. We haven't taken advantage of the broad array of healthier people that don't use the services as much. So when you have a broader pool, you're able to lower the costs, and as has been demonstrated in other westernized countries, and even some what would consider third world countries, we spend up to 4 to 5 times more money, 2 to 5 times more if you compare it to some of the more costlier single-payer systems. 2 to 5 times more money, and we live about 4 to 5 years less than those countries do. And the last years of our life are not as healthy as their last years of life. And so is that a good investment of our resources? With how many of us remember when people were protesting about the Affordable Care Act as it was making its way through, saying, keep your government hands off my Medicare, right? It's like people have, again, it's that disconnect you were talking about, Peter, where people don't understand that the Medicare is a federally run program. You pay your taxes into it, and then you get your services when you reach the age of 65. So I teach a health policy class on the economics of different systems of healthcare. And I make the students come to their own conclusions about which way is the best way to go. And most of them actually land in the Medicare for all. And that's what I'm going to call it from now on, because single payer has been hijacked by people that are trying to make it sound like it's something terrible and doom and gloom and death to the planet if we move in that direction. And so if we say Medicare for all, it's a little bit harder for people to make that same kind of inflammatory rhetoric. And so I think that having a pooled resource, I think there are some things that we can do to manage some of the waste right now. There are people that order a lot of services and tests and things who also have investments into those services and tests. And so you see a lot of waste in how many CAT scans do you need and how many third opinions do you need in order to determine what the best course of treatment. And where we've been delinquent is not in looking at prevention and early detection. If we prevent things up on the front end, we're saving a lot of dollars in the downstream. And with this focus, it's about a 2,000-page document. There's about 10 pages of good policy in it. And some of the good policy, we didn't get health care reform, we really got some insurance reform. So your kids get to stay on until they're 26 and you don't get kicked off because you have to use it. And you can't get excluded from purchasing insurance because you have a pre-existing condition. And, oh, by the way, what's coming up soon is the insurance companies actually have to spend 85% of their dollars on actually delivering health care. So there are some good elements in it, but just a reminder that just because you have insurance doesn't mean you have access to health care. Because if you go on an exchange and purchase your cheap insurance so that you can qualify for your tax credit when you have to file, doesn't mean you're going to find a provider who's actually going to take the insurance plan that you have. So there are still some problems with this, and I think where the president made a mistake was trying to do the whole thing at once, rather than getting all the people in the room and get the low-hanging fruit and taking the incremental steps forward. The things that I just talked about that most people would agree with. The concern right now is that in our the court battle that's coming up now, that we're going to have a court that turns out the mandate and says that it's not legal, and there's not a severability clause, which means that if one element of this 2,000-page bill goes out, the whole thing can go out. And so then we're starting all over again. So we don't even get those 10 pages of good policy. Now, I think if that were to happen, the public would scream about that, because I think there are a lot of people that actually are benefiting from the elements that have already been in place. But we have a long way to go, and while I've been a proponent of single payer for almost my whole career, we were talking about it through the California Nurses Association when I was first a nurse in the early 80s. But it's gaining momentum, and I think as more people think about it and understand what it really is, and the polling is showing that it's there, the movement is going in the right direction, I think we will get there eventually. But we're in a really tough time right now. We're not having people that are speaking from a place of knowledge about the issue. It's more from the place of passion.
And we have Republicans led by Wisconsin Congressman Paul Ryan, who are dedicated to dismantling Medicare. And one of the false choices that I think they put forward is that Medicare needs additional funding. And we know that one of the big burdens in Medicare was the Bush extension of prescription drug coverage that doesn't allow the government to negotiate with the drug companies over price. And so Republican policies that risk the solvency of the Medicare fund are used by Republicans to say, well, we've got to dismantle the whole thing. So, Susan, if we do achieve full coverage under a Medicare for All plan, what would you do to shore up the program so that it is solvent and does provide coverage for every American?
Well, I think everybody pays their fair share, first of all, and into the system. It's a huge pool. Bulk purchasing, I mean, you mentioned the pharmaceutical issue. Canada gets the exact same drugs that we get from our exact same pharmaceutical companies, and they pay a third to a half for the exact same drug. And it's because they have bulk purchasing negotiation within their plan. The Canadian plan, unlike this plan that we just passed, is about a 14-page document. Very easy to understand. We will collect money, we will disperse it to the 13 provinces. The provinces will determine how those funds are allocated for the delivery of health care. And part of the problem with the Canadian system is they haven't bumped up their allocation for the cost of it. But if you ask a Canadian if they want the American system, most of them say no. And healthcare providers that are working in Canada, I'm friends and colleagues with these people, they're saying, you know, the rhetoric that came out of the no on single payer came from our American health insurance and pharmaceutical industry, not from Canadians. Now, are there Canadians that come over for specialty procedures? Yes, sure there are. But there's an awful lot of Americans running over the border to buy their cheaper medications too, whether it's Mexico or Canada. And so, you know, we definitely have a lot of work to do in this area. But I think that as people start understanding the issues more and what actually you get for it, when you have large corporations like GM and GE now asking for this, because they're saying that it costs $1,500 per car vehicle, and they're not competitive with foreign markets because they have to accept the burden or the brunt of providing health care for their employees, then I think we're going to start achieving critical mass once the businesses also come on board, and there are some that are.
Next, I'd like to talk about Social Security, and some of the same people who want to dismantle Medicare continue to try to bust into the Social Security Trust Fund. And even President Obama has pained many of us by putting Social Security on the table related to the deficits when it's not a direct driver of deficits. So please tell us how you would move to protect our seniors and to preserve and make sustainable the Social Security program that so many people rely on.
Well, one of the things that we can do is raise the FICA cap. Right now, after you earn a certain amount of money.
Excuse me, that's class warfare.
Well, I would argue that, you know, it's part of that pay your fair share element. And if you're making a higher amount of money, then you should pay the percentage of that into the system, or at least raising the cap to a level that reflects more current income levels. But you know, it's a myth that somehow our Social Security is bankrupt. I think that over the years, the federal government has been borrowing and not paying back, which is creating perhaps some of the challenges. Having our seniors or our workforce do their own investments and not having that element available to them when they retire, I think would set a dangerous precedent. And that was talked about during the Bush administration. They wanted to go privatize Social Security and have our seniors just pick what portfolio they wanted. Well, look what happened with people's portfolios. The recession really took a hit, you know, 20 to 50% in some cases to people's portfolios. And so Social Security was meant to ensure that our seniors who've been working hard and long for their whole lives may not be in the 1% of the wealthiest people, but that they wouldn't have to be homeless on the street or lose their homes or their places to live. And I think, again, it gets back to that question of where are we as a country? Where are we in our values? And what do we hold dear? And for me, you know, I feel better in a community where everybody is thriving and where people are doing well. And I commit my life to ensuring that those that are struggling have a way to get out. And I don't think it's about handouts as much as hand up. And, you know, so then we can start talking about the issues around, you know, Medicaid and CalWORKs programs. But those programs have helped a number of people be able to get out of poverty and move forward. When I was a teenager, pregnant with my first baby, and going to college, I had to rely on Medi-Cal and on food stamps to help me that first year. I've more than paid back my taxes since then for that benefit, but it helped me through a very difficult transition. And I think that's the purpose of having some of these social safety net programs. Once again, at the local level is where we're seeing this. State and federal government is really removed from what is happening in our local communities, and it's at the local level where we're trying to deliver these services. So we need to make sure that our safety net is maintained. It's vitally important, because the consequences for not having that, who then is taking care of the people, and how are we doing that?
You mentioned that you once took food stamps, and it's been really painful. I don't know how many people have been able to watch the endless series of Republican presidential debates. But Newt Gingrich in particular has tried to demonize President Obama by calling him the food stamp president. And it, of course, belies the cause of why 50 million families require, or 50 million people, require food stamps in today's economy. And it tries to skip over what the causes are of the economic downturn that requires so many people who are facing a foreclosure, or who have huge medical bills, or who have lost a job, to look for some support. So could you talk a little bit about that disconnect between the false reality that Republicans often create and try to turn people who need assistance at the most critical time since the Great Depression, and try to turn them into freeloaders, and people are taking handouts, and somehow they're less than real citizens?
Well, but again, at the local level, that's not what we're seeing. When we had some stimulus funds, we invested into jobs in our community with employers that were struggling to make ends meet and to try to build their revenue base. And so what we did was subsidize about 75% of the salary of men and women that were on some type of a program, whether it was CalWorks or General Assistance, or our veterans that were returning home that needed a little extra support. And we paid for that for the first year. And of the, I think it was close to 400 people that benefited from this, about 3/4 of them actually were able to maintain the jobs fully funded by the employer that they were working for, because they were able to start building the revenue again. And we took the step back. It was a one-time funding, but it helped to stimulate that kind of growth, and these were good paying jobs. I think, again, going back to what I said earlier about investing into our infrastructure, it's going to be important that we maintain our roads, our commerce goes across our roads, you know, our children are taught in our schools. What are we telling our children when they're sitting in classrooms where there's buckets collecting rain in their classroom about the importance of education? And when you're putting people to work in those avenues, then you're having people that are actually able to afford to buy the food for their families. My brother, who served for 26 years in the military, 7 tours overseas since September 11th, he, for a while in during his term in the military, was earning a salary that was low enough that his family qualified for food stamps. And he was going overseas, leaving his family behind, worked 24/7 on duty. You know, so it's about the amount of money that we're paying. It's about the erosion of labor, you know, the ability for the workers to be able to sit down with management and talk about fair labor practices. I was a negotiator for the California Nurses Association with my nurse colleagues. And it wasn't so much about raising the dollars or the benefits as much as safe working conditions many times. At UCSF, we had a situation where surgical nurses on 12-hour shifts were asked to do mandatory doubles. Now, do you want somebody standing over you when you're unconscious who's on their 18th or 19th hour without rest or food? You know, so there is a role for the people that are actually delivering the services to sit down with management and talk about the reality of what's going on in their business and find a way to be able to deliver the services in a way that's fair and equitable and safe for the consumers as well as for the employees.
Susan, in this economic downturn, we've seen sharp reductions in public funding for education, particularly higher education. And I see this as such a short-sighted approach, because we are disinvesting in the next generation of the American workforce and putting ourselves at greater disadvantage to global competition. So I think the problem is clearly understood. Do you have ideas for how we can restore the levels of funding that permitted Californians to go to the UC system and the state college system, instead of what we're now doing, which is recruiting people from outside the state and outside the country who are willing to pay a much higher rate of tuition and fees?
Yes, certainly our education system has been eroding. We went from the top of the pile and we're in the race downward. And as an educator in the university system, seeing some of the students that have come out of the university, have come out of the public education system, who still are having difficulties even putting a couple of sentences together into a coherent paragraph and having to do some remedial work there. There are some elements that we need to look at in terms of the No Child Left Behind program that I think has left a lot of children and instructors and teachers behind, because there's such a push toward teaching to a test and getting the right answer on the test, rather than helping our young people learn how to use their critical thinking brains and learn how to do problem solving. But the erosion of Pell Grants and the elimination of the ability for students to work off their grants or loans in a community service. We used to have programs more abundant where people could go and work in a community, like for nurses, rural healthcare, where there was a real deficiency in the ability to attract qualified healthcare professionals. And for 2 years of service, you were forgiven your loan. And while you were there, you were earning, some kind of a salary so you could live, but you were paying off your debt. So I think there are a lot of ways to approach this, but I'm also concerned about the push toward the higher education, forgetting about our trades. The people that are learning how to be mechanics and how to be builders and how to use their hands and have a full array of educational opportunities for the full array of talents and skills that are out there. So, as an educator, this is a really important thing for me. Our children must be competitive now in a global market, more so than ever now. We can see the impact of what happens with global economy and what happens to our economy here, whether it's China or whether it's what's happening in Greece. So our children are our biggest investment into our future, and we need to do right by them. And again, it comes back to that question: is where are our values here in this country, and where are we willing to spend our resources? And I would say focus more on education, early detection and prevention in healthcare. Let's get out of the war business, and let's start really focusing on creating healthy communities.
It seems as we try to put all Americans back to work that one of the big challenges will be people who lost their jobs, who are in midlife, and who are not as attractive to employers as a recent college graduate or a trade school person who has, for example, skills with the internet and technology. Do you have any ideas on how to help people in midlife who want to go back to work, but who have these challenges to overcome?
One of the things that's been successful is coordinating job retraining with the business community and working with the businesses that are also interested in helping to be a problem solver for that type of issue. Now, as we are an aging population and growing older by the minute, we're seeing a large number of our brain power and our brain trust, who has a lot of experience, wisdom, and capabilities, who are now trying to figure out what their next step is. And I think it's a mistake for us to not offer those types of opportunities to our workforce. But I think that the challenge is coordinating those efforts, doing things like what we did with helping to get people back to work. Some of those individuals that I talked about earlier, who were the beneficiaries of that stimulus funding, were older employees that found a way to job retraining and to using their skills and figuring out how to translate former work skills into a new work environment.
Susan Adams is with us. She is a candidate for Congress here in the new 2nd District that includes Humboldt County and the coastal communities all the way from the Golden Gate Bridge to the Oregon border. And you can visit her website at susanadamsforcongress.com. We're talking about the Adams Agenda, which is a 10-point plan that reflects her values and her priorities if you elect to send her to Washington. And Susan, the recent controversies have really surprised me, starting with the Susan G. Komen Foundation's decision, a political decision in my view, to cut funding to Planned Parenthood. And there is, in my view, also an orchestrated assault on Planned Parenthood. And we've seen recently this extend to contraception, to birth control. And it's being framed by conservatives and Republicans as simply an issue of religious freedom. I don't buy that. Do you?
You're asking an OBGYN nurse practitioner. I've been practicing reproductive health for most of my career, and certainly I think this again emphasizes the importance of having some women voices there. If you looked at the testimony that was happening, the photo, there was a Facebook photo that came out, and it was a whole lineup of white men sitting there, some of them with collars, who are protesting vociferously over, how the horrors of having women have access to contraception. But if they don't want abortion, that's the way to, go. And I didn't see the same argument about, like I said earlier, Viagra. There's definitely some, I think, an assault on women's reproductive health. And, having been in the trenches fighting for this for my whole career, this is certainly an area that I will not give in on this issue. I think that with 7 billion people on the planet, and with women who, have had no other options other than childbearing, there's a lot of data to show that when you give women the opportunity for education, workforce training, they're having smaller families. And they're doing it with contraception availability. Now, the beauty of the Susan B. Komen Foundation issue that came up was the number of people that said, don't do this, you've lost my funding, you've lost my support. It was like just within, it seemed like moments that they were reversing their position. So there again, the power of the voice of the people. And we speak with our dollars, we speak with our money. And if you're telling people, if you're telling these organizations you're not going to invest in them because they're not continuing in the track that made it attractive for you to invest in them in the first place, that's very powerful. There was another area for us to take a look at is the area of tax benefits or federal tax dollars that are supporting these healthcare facilities that are claiming religious right. So if you're accepting taxpayer dollars, just like the federal laws that said we're not going to pay federal dollars for women to terminate pregnancies, you have to find some other way to do that. Well, if you're accepting federal taxpayer dollars for your services and you're making money off that, then you should be abiding by the federal laws that say if you have an insurance program for your employees, it needs to cover these programs. And it doesn't take away I fully support religious freedom, and I think there is a really important reason why we have separation of church and state. And I think sometimes there are too many legislators that try to cross the line in that area. And I'll go to the mounts for a person's religious freedom rights. I have, some of my children are practicing a variety of different faiths, and that's important that we protect that, just like we protect free speech, like we protect our individual right to due process, that you're innocent until proven guilty. And I think we have some work to go in terms of who gets to be counted as an individual. I think corporations are not individuals with the same inalienable rights. So there's a lot of work to do, but again, I think having a nurse's voice, having a woman's voice, having that perspective there, and it doesn't mean that the genders are right or wrong in how they're doing it, but when you have only 16% of our elected federal representatives speaking with that woman's voice and woman's experience, like Jackie Spears stood up very strongly for women's reproductive rights and told a personal story that was very powerful, that helped change that direction. And we have our own stories to tell, and we need to be part of that dialogue.
Susan, since September 11th, we've had the Patriot Act. We have domestic wiretapping and surveillance that includes interception of our emails. The President signed the National Defense Authorization Act, which includes language that would permit an American citizen to be held indefinitely without charge or trial. These are just some key examples of the incursions into rock-solid constitutional rights. What would you do in Congress to restore our full constitutional rights, just rolling back to September 10th of 2001?
Well, there's some legislation now that's being proposed. Dianne Feinstein's involved with that would fix that element that says that our citizens can be held indefinitely without due process. As a member of the Board of Supervisors, we sent letters in opposition to the Patriot Act, to our librarians having to disclose when somebody takes out questionable material. There are a number of attempts, and I think it's fear-based. I think when we live from fear, we think somehow by doing this we're protecting ourselves. And I say we're not protecting ourselves. I think it's more dangerous for us by not supporting what our really brilliant forefathers, and I think there might have been a few mothers in there, but they were behind the scenes. But what our forefathers put down pen to paper, that separate church and state, give you the freedoms for speech, to not be afraid to be that you will find yourself hung or burned at the stake or whatever else because you have a different opinion, to have the rights of the privacy of your own home from being invaded. And I think that does translate to internet invasion. But anybody that thinks they have privacy now, is under an illusion. I mean, you have, like I said earlier, satellites that are, can see what we're doing at any given time. How many of you have done a Google map? I mean, you can see when your car is parked in front of your house because of satellite technology. So, the illusion of privacy, is I think getting tighter and tighter from being reality. But there are still some things that we can do to ensure that people get a fair deal, that you're innocent until proven guilty, that you have the right to due process, and that we are, all of us, created equal, regardless of who we love, regardless of what our race and color and creed is, regardless of our age or our ability or disability. And those are values that I have fought fiercely for in my professional career as well as in my policy-making career.
Following the questionable elections for president of 2000 and 2004 and other elections based on electronic voting machines and tabulators, many people have been fighting for election integrity. And here in Humboldt County, I know firsthand that citizens drove a process, and that Carolyn Cernich, the chief of elections here in Humboldt County, responded. And Humboldt now has a transparent and highly credible process for conducting elections. Tell me your thoughts about how much Americans can have confidence in the elections that we can conduct, and what you would do to restore and expand election integrity.
I think Carolyn has set a good example for the rest of the country. And openness, transparency, no hanging chads, systems that can't be hijacked and tampered with because of electronic gerrymandering, all of those things, we need to be vigilant. And again, it goes back to the issue that democracy is not a spectator sport. We have to be actively engaged or it gets taken away from us. And one of the things that's been really interesting to me during this, my travels up and down the coast, and I put about 1,000 to 1,200 miles on my Prius on any given weekend, joyfully, happily. But that how many people say, well, I'm not registered to vote, or I don't want to get involved, or I hate them all, none of them are worth it. And people are dying in other countries for the right to be engaged in their democracy. So how do we re-engage our young people? How do we teach them civic responsibility? How do we get them excited and understanding what the difference is between your city council member and your county supervisor, and then your sewer district and your education board, and then going all the way up to state and federal government? There are adults, when I've knocked on doors in my race, I said, I'm the nurse who's running for supervisor in your district. And they say, well, isn't Mayor, Borough our supervisor? No, he's your mayor in your city, and I'm running for supervisor. And I'm doing a little civics lesson on the difference between the two. So there are even adults that are challenged with, you know, the election process and their civic engagement. And I think we need to find ways to get more people actively engaged, because if the silent majority actually started roaring, we would see some of these changes, I believe, that we're looking for.
And I hope that you will talk to your friends, your neighbors, and other people who regard you as brilliant and help them understand that this is an open seat and an open race. Don't let endorsements or political parties or media groups define for you who is going to be your next member of Congress. It is your decision, and that's why I'm very glad that you came out tonight to join us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Enjoy your guys' circle jerk.
So were you told you couldn't let your children play?
Yeah, gave me a ticket to boot. I don't know what.